Hello, and welcome to my new video. This time I'm going to talk about Plato. Just about Plato. I'm going to talk a lot about him. We're going to read a lot from him. The bottom line is this. This country's falling apart. It's going to hell in a handbasket. The whole Western civilization is. And it's because we stopped reading Plato. But the enemy did not, I assure you. Everything that he says you need to do to educate your citizens and get a government going, they do the exact opposite. Now for them, if you even try to do to them what they do to you, then God help you. So how did I come to have such an extensive knowledge of Plato, and how was I able to equip myself to deal with the modern world with Plato? Well, as I've said in several of my videos, I'm working on a book on Atlantis. I know how he wrote the story. And here's a hint. If you want to know what Plato meant by the story of the story of Atlantis, then you should read Plato. And that's what I'm doing. Making a lot of extensive notes and everything. Did several readings. And so I thought I would gather a lot of my favorite observations that Plato made about a society and read them out to you and show you how they're being used to destroy our society. And that's the bad news. The good news is we can turn everything around within a generation. Within a generation. Okay, so we're going to start out talking about Plato, giving you an idea of how he works. There are 3 works that I'm quoting from. I'm actually working on 4 books for my book. 4 dialogues. There's the Republic, which he wrote in his prime, and then the sequel to the Republic, and he wrote a sequel later. There are 2 of them. There's Timaeus, which is his creation account, which we'll do some reading from, and then there's Critias, which is the actual story of Atlantis. But it's really one dialogue. Timaeus starts out with Critias saying, I'm going to tell you about Atlantis, but first let Timaeus tell you about how the cosmos was created. And the final work, and his largest work, was the Laws. And I talked about that in my works on homosexuality. And anyway, so I'm mostly going to be quoting from the Republic and from Timaeus and from the Laws. Mostly the first and the last. What's going on here to understand Plato is the Republic, it's about how to set up a proper city. But it's also about how to leverage the things in the world to vault up into heaven, into the eternal realm. What Timaeus is about is how did the eternal realm descend into the cosmos to create the cosmos, to model the cosmos on itself. So it's a natural sequel to what's going on. Okay, so to understand Plato, that helps you orient yourself. The Republic he wrote in his prime. Timaeus and Critias came later. The Laws is his last work. Now this is something that I want you to think about when thinking about Plato. Also, you need to think about this when you're thinking about the Bible. Lethe, L-E-T-H-E, forgetfulness. Social collective forgetfulness. What Plato's readers, what his readers knew and assumed, and what he assumed they knew, and things that we have forgotten. It's kind of like when I talked about, I'm stone cold certain, the author of the Epic of Gilgamesh knew the story of Adam and Eve, and he expected his readers to know that story. So you can line up the creation of Enkidu with the creation of Adam. It's a perfect match. The Epic of Gilgamesh was written by Amorites. The Israelites are Amorites, so there you have your connection. And so one of the things, this lethe is important for Plato, is if Plato, my position is sometime after he wrote the Republic, he was introduced to Moses. Timaeus is his expansion on Genesis chapter 1. Critias is based on Deuteronomy and on the book of Ezekiel. Okay? And so, but the question I have to ask is, that I have to keep asking myself, if Moses looms so large in the work of Plato, why does Plato never mention Moses? And I'm finally getting a working hypothesis. If the fall of Atlantis was inspired by the fate of Jerusalem, and it was a sin so terrible it required the extermination of the city, What does it tell us about the sin of Jerusalem? And if 500 years after Plato's death, Jerusalem would suffer the same fate, if Plato were told that, would Plato be surprised? They probably already had a reputation for doing what they do, which is pretty much whatever they want, therefore that they're lawless. So why would any sane Greek person listen to their lawgiver? I mean, he cannot have been a good one. And my work has powerful explanatory power, great explanatory power. For example, we have the Septuagint, the translation into Greek from the Hebrew Bible, and this is the English translation from the Greek translation. If you read the introduction to Ezekiel, there's some odd word choices that they made in their translation, like lawless in chapter 16 of Ezekiel, anomos. Why would they make that choice? If the translator knew about the connection between Atlantis and Jerusalem, that would explain why they made that choice. Because if you look at the Hebrew, it actually doesn't make sense. So that's an example of Arlethe. Math, and I would also say music. Apparently, everything he wrote is based on mathematical models that we know nothing about, although we might be able to, well, I'll talk about that in a second. If you're reading Plato, don't be ashamed when you get to the math that you get absolutely lost and you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're going to have to go get help, and I did. I've spilled something on this. There's some bleed through. In Timaeus, when he talks about how the cosmos was divvied up, we have all these different numbers, and I went and found a guy who divvied them up for you and figured out what they were. It's a musical scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, re, fa, sol. He also has this, the division from the intelligible world to the sensible world, the intelligible, the sensible, and just the way, anyway, someone else has gone through all of his work, and I don't know about this, I can't vouch for this, and he counted up the words, and the way he has the cosmos divided up, apparently that's the way the subjects are divided up. So there's a lot of math going on here with Plato. There's an argument over that. There's an argument over everything because there's a lot of big questions. So we know nothing about this model, but Aristotle did because he talked about it. We can probably reconstruct it from careful study of his work, which looks like what we're doing. So in a way, Plato's Academy can be considered a school of Pythagoras. Pythagoras is the cosmos is made of math. Aristotle has quotes from Plato that have otherwise been lost. I have not read Aristotle. Now, as I read, you're going to hear me read off number and letter combinations. These are the so-called Stephanus numbers from the Greek text as edited by the French scholar Henri Estienne in 1578. And Estienne is Stephen, and Latin is Stephanus. Now, how I've divvied up the different quotes from Plato. I'm going to talk first about the way things should be and typically were before these crazy people and these creepy cult leaders took over our country, about 70 years. The catastrophe of today in some. We're going to talk about the catastrophe of equality that we keep talking about. The catastrophe of education and music. Music's very important with Plato. We let a lot slide on these that we should not have let slide. We're going to have to fix. And if you fix them with your young people, boom, problem solved. We're going to get out of this quicker than you think. There's a catastrophe of our so-called healthcare, which is easily 10 times more expensive than it should be. Then there's the catastrophe of animal control. People. We're animals. As far as they're concerned, we're just animals. You watch the way they talk about us. They just think we're animals. And to a large extent, we're behaving that way, but they've reduced us to that. And the reason why they've reduced us to that is because we let them. Because we let too many things slide. And finally, there's hope. We can get out of this faster than you think, as I've already talked about. All right, first quote, we're going to talk about from the Laws, 770C through 771A. And what are we talking about here? This is the way things should typically be. Okay, so the Athenian, who is Plato, and Megillus, who is a Spartan, or is he a Cretan? And Clinias, who's a Cretan, or is he a Spartan? I get those two mixed up. So Megillus and Clinias and the Athenian are handing their law code off to their successors. And they address them as follows. And this is a good sum of what we should look for. Colleagues and protectors of our laws, we shall inevitably have a great many gaps in every section of our code. However, we shall certainly take care to outline a sort of sketch of the complete system with its main points, and it will be your job to take this sketch and fill in the details. You ought to hear what your aim should be when you do this. Megillus and Clinias and I have mentioned it to each other more than once, and we are agreed that our formula is a good one. We want you to be sympathetic to our way of thinking and become our pupils, keeping in view this aim which the three of us are unanimous, a giver and a guardian of laws should have. The central point on which we agree amounted to this, quote, our aim in life should be goodness and spiritual virtue appropriate to mankind. There are various things that can assist us. It may be some pursuit we follow, a particular habit, like going to the gym, or something we possess. We may get help from some desire we have, or some opinion we hold, or some course of study, which is a lot of what I do. And all this is true of both male and female members of the community, so women too, young and old. Whatever the means, it's this aim we've described that we all must all strain every muscle to achieve throughout our life. No man, whoever he is, should ever be found valuing anything else if it impedes his progress, not even in the last resort the state. Rather than have the state tolerate the yoke of slavery and be ruled by unworthy hands, it may be absolutely necessary to allow it to be destroyed or abandon it by going into exile. I say, burn the bitch down. However, here in America, the Supreme Court, as you might know, is making some very big moves. Because although what we have needs to be destroyed, our Constitution needs to stay because it's perfect. He talks about, and I'm not going to have the quote here, two mother constitutions, monarchy and democracy, and that a good, stable society needs to be a combination of both. And that's precisely what we have. And so we were headed to extreme democracy, which ultimately led to extreme monarchy or tyranny. So let it all go. But the Supreme Court is basically destroying all the stuff that we built on top of the Constitution that's bad. Got rid of Roe versus Wade. It secured the Second Amendment. It secured the freedom of religion in schools. It's destroyed a lot of the power of our bureaucracies. It's amazing what our bureaucrats were able to do in this country. They were forcing coal generators to move to wind. No, you need lawgivers to do something like that. And so we're basically getting positioned to go back to the way we used to be, which is a good thing. I don't have any problem with throwing out national gay marriage, for example, but we have a full faith and credit clause in the Constitution. So if I go to California and marry another man, then Texas needs to recognize that marriage. Obey the law. It's a good law. Okay. Or abandon it by going into exile. All that sort of hardship we simply have to endure rather than permit a change of the sort of political system which will make men worse. Okay, so we're gonna have to go through a lot of suffering to get rid of this trash that we're now living under, but I'm ready to endure it. It's because it's worth it. End of quote. This, then, is the agreed statement. It's now up to you to consider this double aim of ours and censor the laws that could do nothing to help us. But you must commend and welcome affected ones with enthusiasm, and cheerfully live as they dictate. You must have no truck with other pursuits which aim at different goods, as people call them. Everything now is on money. We have these people from Eastern Europe with their sad tales of woes that we bought into, and now they've taken everything over. And we have these creepy cult leaders, the death cult leaders. We have a bunch of sociopaths. We just have a bunch of wicked people. It's time for them to go. Time to get rid of them. Alrighty, our next quote. The Republic, 375. Do you think that, when it comes to guarding, there is any difference between the nature of a pedigree young dog and that of a well-born youth? What do you mean? Well, each needs keen senses, speed to catch what it sees, and strength in case it has to fight it out with what it captures. They both need these things. And each must be courageous if indeed he's to fight well, of course. And will a horse, a dog, or any other animal be courageous if he isn't spirited? Or haven't you noticed just how invincible and unbeatable spirit is, or so that its presence makes the whole soul fearless and unconquerable? I've noticed that. The physical qualities of guardians are clear then. Yes, as far as their souls are concerned, they must be spirited. That too. But if they have natures like that, Glaucon, won't they be savage to each other and to the rest of the citizens? By God, it would be hard for them to be anything else. Glaucon is his brother, by the way, his gay brother. Yet surely they must be gentle to their own people and harsh to the enemy. If they aren't, they won't wait around for others to destroy the city, but will do it themselves first. And that's what we have, guardians who are wild dogs, who are from a different species of dog. So they have no reason to love us at all, to be gentle with us at all. They'll destroy the city themselves. That's true. What are we to do then? Where are we to find a character that is both gentle and high-spirited at the same time? After all, a gentle nature is the opposite of a spirited one, apparently. If someone lacks either gentleness or spirit, and they lack gentleness, they have no gentleness, he can't be a good guardian. Yet it seems impossible to combine them. It follows that a good guardian cannot exist. That's not true. We have plenty of good guardians. (376b). Okay, 376b. When a dog sees somebody that it doesn't know, it gets angry before anything bad happens to it. But when it knows someone, it welcomes him, even if it has never received anything good from him. Haven't you ever wondered at that? I've never paid any attention to it, but obviously that is the way a dog behaves. Surely this is a refined quality in its nature, and one that is truly philosophical. In what way philosophical? Because it judges anything it sees to be either a friend or an enemy on no other basis than that it doesn't know the one and knows the other. And how could it be anything besides a lover of learning if it defines what is its own and what is alien to it in terms of knowledge and ignorance? Well, it couldn't. But surely the love of learning is the same thing as philosophy or the love of wisdom. It is. Then we may confidently assume in the case of a human being too, that if he is to be gentle toward his own and those he knows, he must be a lover of learning and wisdom. We may. Philosophy, spirit, speed, and strength must all then be combined in the nature of anybody who is to be a fine and good guardian of our city. Absolutely. There's no lover of wisdom in the people who rule America today. And when you learn wisdom, you learn to automatically love it when you see it, no matter who you see it in. The Republic 412, D through E. Then in the first place, mustn't they be knowledgeable and capable, and mustn't they care for the city? That's right. Again, Socrates is talking to Glaucon. Now, one cares most for what he loves, necessarily. And someone loves something most of all when he believes that the same things are advantageous to it as to himself, and supposes that if it does well, he'll do well. And if it does badly, then he'll do badly too. Well, that's right. Obviously, that does not matter to the people who rule America. They don't care. Then we must choose from among our guardians those men who, upon examination, seem most of all to behave throughout their lives, that they must eagerly seem most of all to believe throughout their lives, that they must eagerly pursue what is advantageous to the city and be wholly unwilling to do the opposite. In the case of people who rule us, it's pretty clear often they do things that hurt us, even when it doesn't help them. I mean, they really hate us. Okay? They must eagerly pursue what is advantageous to the city and be wholly unwilling to do the opposite. Such people would be suitable for the job at any rate, says Glaucon. I think we must observe them at all ages, to see whether they are guardians of this conviction, and make sure that neither compulsion nor magic, spells, will get them to discard or forget their belief that they must do what is best for their city. Magic spells. I've talked about this in other videos. We're under a magic spell. They've cast a lot of spells. Okay? Make sure that neither compulsion nor magic spells will get them to discard or forget their belief. What do you mean by discarding? I'll tell you. I think the discarding of a belief is either voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary when one learns that the belief is false. Involuntary in the case of all true beliefs. I understand voluntary discarding, but not involuntary. What's that? Don't you know that people are voluntarily deprived of bad things, but involuntarily deprived of good ones? Okay, well, let me read this first. It isn't being deceived about the truth a bad thing, while possessing the truth is good? Or don't you think that to believe the things that are so is to possess the truth? That's right, and I do think that people are involuntarily deprived of true opinions. But can't they also be deprived by theft, magic spells, and compulsions? Now I don't understand again. I'm afraid I must be talking like a tragic poet. By victims of theft, I mean those who are persuaded to change their minds, or those who forget, because time, in the latter case, time passed and you just forgot, an argument in the former, takes away their opinions without their realizing it. Do you understand now? Yes. By the compelled, I mean those whom pain or suffering causes to change their mind. I understand that, and you're right. The victims of magic, I think you'll agree, are those who change their mind because they are under the spell of pleasure or fear. To me, it seems that everything that deceives does so by casting a spell. And that's what it is when I'm talking to people a lot. And it's not left or right. Talking to white people about the Iraq War in 2003 or, heterosexual white males. And talking to people about the healthcare scare. I mean, people are just like they're caught under a spell. And that's a real thing. Okay, so these people who rule us, they're the exact opposite. Okay, 413A or A through D. Oh, I just read that. Okay, I'll just keep reading. The victims of magic, I think you'll agree, are those who change their mind because they are under the spell of pleasure or fear. And Glaucon says, it seems to me that everything that deceives does so by casting a spell. Then, as I said just now, we must find out who are the best guardians of their conviction, that they must always do what they believe to be the best for the city. We must keep them under observation from childhood and set them tasks that are most likely to make them forget such a conviction or be deceived out of it. And we must select whoever keeps on remembering it and isn't easily deceived and reject the others. Do you agree? Yes. And we must subject him to labors, pains, and contest in which we can watch for these traits. That's right. Okay, so we got to find people who can stand up to the charms. How could Odysseus stand up to the charms of the sirens? Well, he had to be latched to the ship so he couldn't move. That's the only way he can guide the ship. So now we're going to go to Laws 751. This is where we're at today. 751C. It's obvious to anyone that legislation is a tremendous task, and that when you have a well-constructed state with a well-framed legal code, to put incompetent officials in charge of administering the code, or in our case, just flat out wicked, is a waste of good laws, and the whole business degenerates into farce. And not only that, the state will find that its laws are doing it damage and injury on a gigantic scale, naturally. So now, you see, they blow off the Constitution when they want to blow it off, but they're real sticklers for the Constitution when it supports them. Oh boy. And so the Constitution now is becoming toxic, even though it's the greatest Constitution in the world. But as I said, I talked about that earlier, I think the Supreme Court is starting to fix that. Okay, Laws 793 B through D. Alrighty. Okay, here's why we're all falling apart. That all the rules we are now working through are what people generally call unwritten customs. Now we're talking about unwritten customs. And all this sort of thing is precisely what they mean when they speak of ancestral law. Not only that, but the conclusion to which we were driven a moment ago was the right one. That although laws is a wrong term for these things, we can't afford to say nothing about them, because they are the bonds of the entire social framework, linking all written and established laws with those yet to be passed. They act in the same way as ancestral customs dating from time immemorial, which by virtue of being soundly established and instinctively observed, shield to protect existing law. But if they go wrong, or are gotten wrong, or are pushed in the wrong direction, and get out of tune, which is exactly what happened, well, you know what happens when carpenter's props buckle in a house? They bring the whole building crashing down, one thing on top of another. Stays in superstructure, however well built. However good the Constitution is, it doesn't matter. All of it alike. All because the original timber work was given away. We just gave away our country. So you see, Clinius, this is what we have to bear in mind in thoroughly binding your state together, while it is still a new foundation, because they're founding a new city on Crete, and they're talking about how the laws should be. We must do our best not to omit anything, great or small, whether laws, habits, or institutions, because they are all needed to bind a state together. And the permanence of the one kind of norm depends on that of the other. So we ought not to be surprised to see a flood of apparently unimportant customs or usages making our legal code a bit on the long side. See, this goes, as I said, they're reading Plato. We've stopped. This is why they're meddling so much in our lives. They have to. They know they have to. But they also know things are about to fall apart. And what's going to happen to what would be their fates when it does? Because the Russians and the Chinese are not going to wait for us. Laws 788 A through C. Now that the boys and girls have been born, I suppose their education and training will be the most suitable topic to deal with next. This is not something we can leave on one side. That would be out of the question. And we did leave it on one side. We let them slip in and educate our children every time they watch their shitty TV programs and movies and video games. We're letting them educate our kids. However, we shall clearly do better to confine our remarks to advice and instruction and not venture on precise regulations. In the privacy of family life, you see, a great many trivial activities never get publicity, and under the stimulus of feelings of pleasure or pain or desire, they can all too easily fly in the face of the lawgiver's recommendations and produce citizens whose character are varied and conflicting, which is a social evil. You see, we both need to get a grip on this. We both sometimes need to be a little bit bossy. and nitpicky. But you got to be careful here. They're very good at being careful and tricking your kids into thinking stupid things. Now, although these activities are so trivial and so common that one cannot decently arrange them to punish them by law, they do tend to undermine the written statutes because men get in the habit of repeatedly breaking rules in small matters. This Constitution doesn't matter. The society that we're building, this Constitution doesn't matter. And this is what I tell gay people. What good is it going to pass gay rights legislation in a world that doesn't respect law? That is why, in spite of all the difficulties in legislating such points, we cannot simply say nothing about them. But I must try to clarify my point by showing you some samples, as it were. At any minute, I expect it looks as if I'm rather concealing. I'm concealing my meaning. Clinius, you're quite right, it does. I take it we were justified in asserting that if an education is to qualify as correct, it simply must show that it is capable of making our souls and bodies as fine and handsome as they can be. Of course. What is this society producing? People that are called mutants. Have you not looked in a mirror lately? Do you not know what you're looking like? Oh, they're reading Plato. Okay. Want to make them as handsome as they can be? Well, of course. And I suppose, to make the most elementary requirement, that if a person is going to be supremely good looking, his posture must be as erect as possible, right from as early as years. Certainly. Okay. All we got to do is fix it with the next generation. All we got to do. Okay, let's see if there's more in here I need to read. Well, now, we observe, don't we, that the earliest stages of growth of every animal are by far the most vigorous and rapid. That's why a lot of people actually maintain that in the case of man, the first 5 years of life see more growth than the next 20. That's true. But we're aware that rapid growth without frequent and appropriate graded exercise leads to a lot of trouble for the body and the brain. That's true. Indeed. And isn't it precisely when a body is getting the most nourishment that it needs the most exercise? Okay? The first 5 years, get those kids going. The first 5 years, they're going to grow up to be strong men and women who aren't going to take bullshit. Okay. Republic 567A through 569C. What I have in here in my notes, a perfect spot-on description of the tyranny we live under. 567A to 569C. Probably won't remember. But also, so that they'll become poor through having to pay war taxes. Okay, I suppose that he has dealt with his exiled enemies by making peace with some and destroying others. So that all is quiet on that front. The first thing he does is to stir up a war so that the people will continue to feel the need of a leader. Probably so. Iraq, etc. Russia in the Ukraine, but they can't do anything about it, can they? Because they've already destroyed us. Everything's crashing down. But also so that the people, will become poor through having to pay war taxes. For that way, they'll have to concern themselves with their daily needs and be less likely to plot against him. Yeah, inflation is going crazy, clearly. And he's talking to Adamantus, who's another one of his brothers. But besides, if he suspects some people are having thoughts of freedom and not favoring his rule, can he find a pretext for putting them at the mercy of the enemy in order to destroy them? And for all these reasons, isn't it necessary for a tyrant to always be stirring up a war? It is, or dismantling the border and bringing in a bunch of foreigners. And because of this, isn't he all the more readily hated by the citizens? Of course. The more they do it, the more we hate them. The more we hate them, the more terrified they are of us. Moreover, don't the bravest of those who help to establish this tyranny and who hold positions of power within it speak freely to each other and to him, criticizing what's happening? They probably do. Then the tyrant will have to do away with all of them if he intends to rule until he's left with neither friend nor enemy of any worth. Clearly. You know, and I've talked about this in previous videos. Unless you've sold your soul to the devil, you're not getting anywhere in this society. He must therefore keep a sharp lookout for anyone who is brave, large-minded, knowledgeable, or rich, and happy is he, like Elon Musk, and happy is he, and so happy is he, that he must be the enemy of them all, whether he wants to be or not, and plot against them until he has purged them from the city. That's a fine sort of purge, or purge them from the government. Yes, it's for the opposite of the one that's fine sort of a purge. Yes, for it's the opposite of the one that doctors perform on the body. They draw off the worst and leave the best, but he does just the opposite. That's true. And then Adamanta says, yet I expect he'll have to do this if he's really going to rule. Yeah, they have to do it. It's a blessed happy necessity he's bound by. It's a blessedly happy necessity he's bound by, since it requires him either to live with the inferior majority, even though they hate him, or not to live at all. Yes, it's exactly his condition. And won't he need a larger and more loyal bodyguard the more his actions make the citizens hate him? Putting up fences in Washington? Of course. And who will these trustworthy be, and where will he get them from? They'll come swarming on their own accord if he pays them. Drones, by the dog, all matters of foreign drones. That's what I think you're talking about. You're right. But what about the city itself? Wouldn't he be willing to what? To deprive citizens of their slaves by freeing them and enlisting them in his bodyguards? He certainly would, since they'd be likely to prove most loyal to him. What a blessedly happy sort of fellow you make the tyrant out to be, if these are the sorts of people he employs as friends and loyal followers after he's done away with the earlier ones. This is exactly what's happened to America today. This is why the border's open. He said in other parts that, bringing in foreigners there's something called a litmus test. If you got it, you got it. The litmus test of a tyranny is they're bringing in a lot of foreigners. All right, 575 B through D. Okay, so we're still in the catastrophe of today. 575 B through D. Now, if there are only a few such men in the city, crazy, lawless people, and the rest of the people are moderate, this mob will leave the city in order to act as a bodyguard to some other tyrant, or to serve as mercenaries if there happens to be a war going on somewhere. But if they chance to live in a time of peace and quiet, they'll remain in the city and bring about lots of little evils. What sort of evils do you mean? Says Adamantus. They steal, break into houses, snatch purses, steal clothes, rob temples, and sell people into slavery. Sometimes, if they are good speakers, they become sycophants and bear false witness and accept bribes. These evils are small, provided that there happen to be only a few such people. Yes, for small things are small by comparison to big ones. And when it comes to producing wickedness and misery in a city, all of these evils together don't, as the saying goes, come within a mile of the rule of a tyrant. But when such people become numerous and conscious of their numbers, it is they, abetted by the foolishness of the people, who create a tyrant. Or the not really foolish, as we just haven't been paying attention. And he, more than any of them, has in his soul the greatest and strongest tyrant of all. Naturally, for he'd be the most tyrannical. That's if the city happens to yield willingly. But if it resists him, then, just as he once chastised his mother and father, he'll now chastise his fatherland, if he can, by bringing in new friends and making his fatherland and his dear old motherland, as the Cretans call it, their slaves, and keeping them that way. For surely this is the end at which such a man's desires are directed. They will not quit, I'm convinced, until we're dead. And they're bringing in a bunch of friends. I have my notes here: Black Lives Matter, Antifa, no border, crime going through the roof, turning a blind eye to it. Okay. The laws, 777C through 778A. Well then, sir, in view of this conflict of opinion, what should we do about our own country? What's our line on the possession of slaves and the way to punish them? Now look here, Clinias, said the Athenian talking to Clinias. The animal, man, quite obviously has a touchy temper. As I said, they think we're animals, and a lot of us have been reduced to animals, and it just confirms their bias. But most of us are not. And the reason why they think so is because they're just in their own little world. They don't freaking talk to us. They have nothing to say to us. They just talk to each other. So they think that we're just animals. The animal man quite obviously has a touchy temper, and it looks as if it won't be easy now or in the future to persuade him to fall neatly into the two categories, slave and freeman or master, which are necessary for practical purposes. Your slave, therefore, will be a difficult beast to handle. The frequent and repeated revolts in Messenia and in the states where people possess a lot of slaves who all speak the same language, can't have that. Can't have that. You can have it in Israel, though. Have shown the evils of the system often enough. And we could point to the various crimes and adventures of the robbers who plague Italy, the Rangers, as they're called. In view of all this, you may well be puzzled to know what your general policy ought to be. In fact, there are just two ways of dealing with the problem open to us. First, if the slaves are to submit to the condition without giving trouble, they should not all come from the same country or speak the same tongue, as far as it can be arranged. Secondly, we ought to train them properly, not only for their sakes, but above all for our own. The best way to train slaves is to refrain from, this is the advice that they're reading, how to treat us. And they're not, as you're about to see, they don't even follow the advice. The best way to train slaves is to refrain from arrogantly ill-treating them, and to harm them even less, assuming that's possible, than you would your equals. You see, when a man can hurt someone as often as he likes, he'll soon show whether or not his respect for justice is natural and unfeigned, and springs from a genuine hatred of injustice. It's kind of like, I understand that a lot of CEOs, how you treat their secretary is how they'll evaluate you. If his attitude to his slaves and his conduct towards them are free of any taint of impiety and injustice, he'll be splendidly effective at sowing the seeds of virtue. Just the same can be said of the way in which any master or dictator or person in any position of authority deals with someone weaker than himself. Even so, we should certainly punish slaves if they deserve it, and not spoil them by simply giving them a warning, as we would free men. Virtually everything you say to a slave should be in order, and you should never become at all familiar with them, neither the women nor the men. Okay. My opinion is you need to get out of slave trade, get rid of slavery, but they just couldn't imagine it at the time. Imagine if I were a Roman slave owner, I'd get my money's worth out of my slave, but ultimately, because that's the way the economy works, but ultimately my goal would be to make the slave independent so that they move on, and then I buy some more slaves and then just work them through the same process. Basically, it's just wage earners is the way I would look at them. All right, so 7, that's what I just read. But, we can't have them speak the same language. God forbid. And it's gotten crazy. Before I got my current job, I delivered for Amazon and for Uber Eats. You'd go in these brand new neighborhoods full of these upper middle class houses full of people from India. I mean, colonies of Indians given these high-tech jobs. A lot of Chinese, a lot of white people too, but away from the big city, but they're there. I remember visiting the campus of University of Texas in Austin back in the 70s, and I was shocked driving through it a couple of years ago. I saw nothing but Chinese people and Indian people, and if I saw any white people, most of them were women. Everything's been given away. Silicon Valley, it's all been given away to aliens. And that's why they're doing it, because they're traitors. Okay. Now we're moving on to the catastrophe of equality. And I actually don't have a lot to say about that. I just actually have one quote. Laws 757A through 758A. Oh, I talked about a monarchy and a democracy. It should be a bit of both. Yeah, here we go. A system of selection like that will in fact be a compromise between a monarchical and a democratic constitution, which is precisely the sort of compromise a constitution should always be, which is what we have. You see, even if you proclaim that a master and his slave shall have equal status, friendship between them is inherently impossible. The same applies to the relations between an honest man and a scoundrel. Indiscriminate equality for all citizens, it amounts to inequality. Let me repeat, indiscriminate equality for all citizens amounts to inequality. Because if the outcome for me and the outcome from George Floyd is the same, and both fill a state with quarrels between its citizens, how correct the old saying is that equality leads to friendship. It's right enough and it rings true, but what kind of equality has this potential is a problem which produces ripe confusion. This is because we use the same term for two concepts of equality, which in most respects are virtual opposites. The first sort of equality, of measures, weights, and numbers, is within the competence of any state and any legislature. That is, one can simply distribute equal rewards by lot. The most genuine equality, and the best, is not so obvious. It needs the wisdom and judgment of Zeus, and only in a limited number of ways does it help the human race. So this is something that we have to be careful with, but we have to acknowledge. Me and George Floyd are not equal under the law. No. Not when it comes to treatment. But however, you have to be careful because, if you have someone who's a minority, you could go unnecessarily hard on them. These things you got to be, but this calls for wisdom. But when states or even individuals do find it profitable, they find it very profitable indeed. The general method, is to grant much to the great and less to the less great, adjusting what you give to take account of the real nature of each, specifically to confer high recognition on great virtue. But when you come to the poorly educated in this respect, to treat them as they deserve. And again, it calls for wisdom and judgment. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. And just always pray. We maintain, in fact, that statesmanship consists of essentially this, strict justice. This is what we should be aiming at now, Clinius. This is the kind of equality we should concentrate on as we bring our state into the world. Because again, this is the laws. Their creed is about to build a new city, and they're discussing what their constitution should be. The founder of any other state should also concentrate on the same goal when he frames his laws. You see, you're aiming for things. You're just aiming for things. Do what you can. And take no notice of a bunch of dictators or a single one, or even the power of the people. He must always make justice his aim. And this is precisely as we've described it. It consists of granting the equality the unequals deserve to get. Yet on occasion, a state as a whole, unless it is prepared to put up with a degree of friction in one part or another, will be obliged to apply these concepts in a rather rough and ready way, because complacence and tolerance, which always wreck complete precision, are enemies of strict justice. Oh, fa la 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 di da. No more of that. But by that, I do not include homosexuality. Going back to slamming homosexuality, I've talked about that in previous videos. You lied about the Bible, and you made life hell for us. You can now see why it is necessary to avoid the anger of the man in the street by giving him an equal chance in the lot, though even as we pray to the gods of good luck to make that lot give the right decision. So, though force of circumstances compels us to employ both sorts of equality, we should employ the second, which demands good luck to prove successful, as little as possible. Give to the great that which is great. And of course, to whom much is given, much is expected. Do that as little as possible, but understand that sometimes you're just going to have to do that. Alrighty. Now we're moving on to the catastrophe of education and music. Plato had a lot to say about this. Laws 788c through 789a. And we've already been here before. Okay, what is the point I'm trying to make here? 789a. The critical first years of life for children. The enemy gets them there too. Yeah, and I've read this before. I'm going to read it again, just to keep in mind. But I must clarify my point by showing you some samples, as it were. At the moment, I expect it looks as if I'm rather concealing my meaning. You're quite right, it does. I take it we were justified in asserting that if an education is to qualify as correct, it simply must show that it is capable of making our souls and bodies as fine and handsome as they can be. Stressing this again. Of course, it's kind of like when I lived in Idaho Falls, Idaho is full of Mormons. The most handsome men I've ever seen, the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life were there. As I said in another video, Mormonism is Christian. They got there weird, but they're still Christian. Okay. And I suppose to make the most elementary requirement that if a person is going to be supremely good looking, his posture must be as erect as possible, right from his earliest years. Certainly. Well, now we observe, don't we, that the earliest stages of growth of every animal are by far the most vigorous and rapid. That's why a lot of people actually maintain that in the case of man, his first 5 years of life see more growth than the next 20. That's true. So again, we can flip this very quickly. 20 years from now, we can be looking at a completely different country. Easy. And be right back to where we started. I'm surprised, I'm not going to finish this because I've already read this before. I'm surprised. Somebody mentioned that it's surprising that we've come as far as we have. And it's true. We still build the best computer, we still design the best computer chips in the world. Apple's a generation ahead. We still do amazing stuff that the Chinese can't touch, despite all of this. Despite the fact that healthcare is 10 times more expensive than it should be, it's really probably closer to 20. Despite the fact that we've been turning out mutants, ugly people. Despite the fact that everything's locked. I see one of the reasons why I stopped doing videos is because I was going to write books. And I'm just like, well, everything's locked down. That's why you just got to burn the whole bitch down. Alrighty. Laws 765E through 766C. Why the direction of education is critical. This is where we failed miserably. This is also an easy fix. 765E. Now we're on our little green labels. Moving on down. The remaining official in this field is the director of the entire education of boys and girls. Here too there should be one official in charge under the law. He must not be younger than 50 years old and the father of legitimate children, preferably both sons and daughters, though either alone will do. The chosen candidate himself and those who choose him should appreciate that this is by far the most important of all the supreme offices in the state, which is why it's so important that we take back the school boards. And we're doing it. But please don't go back to fag bashing. And I don't say this because I'm gay. I'm just like, you screwed up. That was a bad mistake. Any living creature that flourishes in its first stages of growth gets a tremendous impetus towards its natural perfection and the final development appropriate to it. And this is true of both plants and animals, tame and wild, and men too. Yes. This is why things have gotten so weird and bad, but also why things can turn around so quickly. Man is a tame animal, as we put it. He doesn't completely agree that the bodies are animal bodies, but we also have eternal components. And of course, if he enjoys a good education and happens to have the right natural disposition, he's apt to be a most heavenly and gentle creature. But his upbringing has only to be inadequate or misguided, and he'll become the wildest animal on the face of the earth. That's why we see all sorts of wild animals running around, even some with very high IQs. That's why the legislator should not treat the education of children cursorily or as a secondary matter, which we've been doing, which they didn't, because they've been reading Plato. He should regard the right choice of the man who is going to be in charge of the children as something of crucial importance and appoint as their minister the best all-around citizen of the state. So all the officials except the council and members of the executive should meet at the temple of Apollo and hold a secret ballot, meet at the church, each man voting for whichever guardian of the laws he thinks would make the best minister of education. The one who attracts the largest number of votes should be scrutinized by the officials who have elected him, the guardians of the laws standing aside. The minister should hold office for 5 years, and in the 6th he should be replaced by a successor after an election held under the same rules. Okay, so let's fix that, and we are fixing it. It is getting fixed. The Republic, 377A through C. Okay. Now, we start education in music and poetry before physical training, don't we? And he's talking to Glaucon, I think. Of course. Do you include stories under music and poetry? I do. Aren't there two kinds of stories, one true and the other false? Yes. And mustn't our men be educated in both, but first in false ones? I don't understand what you mean. Don't you understand that we first tell stories to children? These are false on the whole, although they have some truth in them. And we tell them to small children before physical training begins. That's true. And that's what I meant by saying that we must deal with music and poetry before physical training. Okay, all right. You know, don't you, that the beginning of any process is most important, especially for anything young and tender. It's at that time that it is most malleable and takes on any pattern one wishes to impress on it. Exactly. Well, to a limit, but even Plato admits that. Then shall we carelessly allow the children to hear any old stories told by just anyone, and take beliefs into their souls that are for the most part opposite of the ones we think they should hold when they're grown up? We certainly won't. Then we must first of all, it seems, supervise the storytellers, which we haven't been doing. We've been let that slide. We'll select this, which is why they do a lot of censorship, because they want to make sure you can't tell stories to children. They're reading Plato. We'll select their stories whenever they are fine or beautiful, and reject them when they aren't. We'll persuade nurses and mothers to tell their children the ones we have selected, since they will shape their children's souls with stories much more than they shape their bodies by handling them. Many of the stories they now tell, however, must be thrown out. Okay? You know, this thing where you're letting your kids watch this TV shit, you need to throw that out. (377E through 378A). Hesiod's creation story is a problem. Plato, this is one of the points that I make, and this is a story that he thinks is bad. This is one of the points that I make. Plato did not like Hesiod, the great poet of the Greek gods. He did not like the creation story. And I think somebody says, hey, here's Moses. And then he took Moses' creation story, not just Genesis chapter 1, but Genesis chapter 2, and he expanded on it using Greek science and philosophy. What was it again? 377E. When a story gives a bad image of what the gods and heroes are like, the way a painter does, whose picture is not at all like the things he's trying to paint. You're right to object to that, says Adeimantus. But what sort of thing in particular do you have in mind? First, telling the greatest falsehood about the most important things doesn't make a fine story. I mean, Hesiod telling us about Hieronymus behaved, how Cronus punished him for it, how he was in turn punished by his own son. But even if it were true, it should be passed over in silence, not told to foolish young people. And if for some reason it has to be told, only to a very few people. pledged to secrecy and after sacrificing not just a pig, but something great and scarce. Only these people should hear it, so that their number is kept as small as possible. Yes, such stories are hard to deal with. Actually, in my last video that I just did, on the whole Bible is an Indo-European recreation story, where I talk about where these stories of Hesiod came from. The Hittites got them from the Hurrians and passed them on to the Greeks, people called the Hurrians. Okay, that's an example of even venerable, well-known, well-loved stories need to be passed on. The Republic 386E through 387B. The more poetic bad ideas are presented, the more well-written they are, the more well-done they are, the more dangerous they are. 386C to 387B. Then we must supervise such stories and those who tell them, and ask them not to disparage the life in Hades in this unconditional way, but rather to praise it, since what they now say is neither true nor beneficial to future warriors. What about life after death? Hey, the terrors of death that you hear about, those aren't true, so why should you teach them? And why would you want to teach your warriors these stories? We'll expunge all sorts of disparagement, beginning with the following lines. And this is like Homer. I would rather labor on earth in service of another, to a man who is landless, with little to live on, than be king over all the dead. This is the Odyssey. Odysseus is being addressed by the dead Achilles and Hades, and also these. He feared that his home should appear to gods and men dreadful, dank, and hated even by the gods. The speaker is the god of the underworld, who is afraid that the earth will split up and reveal that his home is dreadful. Alas, there survives in the halls of Hades a soul, a mere phantasm with its wits completely gone. Achilles speaks these lines as the soul of the dead Patroclus leaves for Hades. Achilles was in love with Patroclus. And he alone could think, the others are flitting shadows. The Odyssey, Circe is speaking to Odysseus about the prophet Tiresias, and the soul, leaving his limbs, made its way to Hades, lamenting its fate, leaving manhood and youth behind. The words refer to Patroclus, who has been mortally wounded by Hector. And these, he sent his soul below the earth like smoke, screeching as it went. The soul referred to as Patroclus, a noble person. As when bats in an awful cave fly around, screeching if one of them falls, from the cluster of the ceiling, all clinging one another, so their souls went screeching. The souls of those suitors of Penelope, whom Odysseus had killed. We'll ask Homer and the other poets not to be angry if we delete these passages and all the similar ones, precisely because they're so well done. I can read Greek, and if it's interlinear, of course I can understand what I'm reading. The power of Homer in the original Greek is shocking, even for somebody whose Greek is crappy as mine. It's shocking how good this man is. And I have to explain this a lot to people. Well, he's such a good singer or whatever. It's just like, yeah, but and sometimes they're not even really that good. Like the Game of Thrones, it's just like, but the story build is great. I was just like, no, it's not. I give it maybe a B. We'll ask Homer and the other poets not to be angry if we delete these passages and all similar ones. It isn't that they aren't poetic and pleasing to the majority of hearers, but that the more poetic they are, the less they should be heard by children, or by men who are supposed to be free and to fear slavery more than death. Most certainly. The Republic, 395C through E. Okay. Imitating something over and over again will turn you into it. Fake it until you make it. So be careful what you imitate. 395C through E. Okay. Then if we're to preserve our first judgment, that our guardians must be kept away from all other crafts, so as to be the craftsmen of the city's freedom, and be exclusively that, and do nothing at all except what contributes to it, They must neither do nor imitate anything else. If they do imitate, they must imitate from childhood what is appropriate for them, namely people who are courageous, self-controlled, pious, of course, love God, and free, and their actions. Imitate their actions. They mustn't be clever at doing or imitating slavish or shameful actions, lest from enjoying the imitation, they come to enjoy the reality. If they really get into it, they'll turn into it. Or haven't you noticed that imitations practiced from youth become part of nature and settle into habits of gesture, voice, and thought? I have indeed. Then we won't allow those for whom we profess to care, and who must grow into good men, to imitate either a young woman or an older one, or one abusing her husband, quarreling with the gods, or bragging because she thinks herself happy, or one suffering misfortune and possessed by sorrows and lamentations, and even less one who is ill in love or in labor. That's absolutely right. Nor must they imitate either male or female slaves doing slavish things. And, it's just the way the economy worked. They had slaves. So, it is what it is. No, they mustn't. Nor bad men, it seems, who are cowards and are doing the opposite of what we described earlier, namely libeling and ridiculing each other, using shameful language while drunk or sober, or wrongdoing themselves and others, whether in word or deed, in the various other ways that are typical to such people. They mustn't become accustomed to making themselves like madmen in either word or deed, for though they must know about mad and vicious men and women, they must neither do nor imitate anything they do. That's absolutely true. You lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And I went 395C. I went all the way through 396A, so I just kept going, but that's okay. Okay, the Republic. The Republic 423E through 424B. This is just like letting TV raise your children. A lot of stuff in here I can't tell you. It's YouTube. 423E, B, E. The Republic. $423E, right there. $424B. These orders that we give, Adamantus, are neither as numerous nor as important as one might think. Indeed, they are all insignificant, provided, as the saying goes, that they guard the one great thing, though I'd rather call it sufficient than great. What's that? Their education and upbringing. For if by being well educated they become reasonable men, they will easily see these things for themselves, as well as all the other things we are omitting. For example, that marriage, the having of wives, and the procreation of children must be governed as far as possible by the old proverb, friends possess everything in common. That would be best. And surely once our city gets a good start, it will go on growing in a cycle. Good education and upbringing, when they are preserved, and they're not, produce good natures and useful natures, who are in turn well educated, grow up even better than their predecessors, both in their offsprings and other respects, just like other animals. That's likely. How far am I supposed to go? Okay. To put it briefly, those in charge must cling to education, and see that it isn't corrupted without their noticing it, which is exactly what happened. Guarding against everything. Above all, they must guard carefully as they can against any innovation in music and poetry or in physical training that is counter to the established order. And they should dread to hear anyone say, people care most for the songs that is newest from the singer's lips. Again, that's the Odyssey. Slightly altered, according to this. Well, aren't you doing the same thing with homosexuality, Bill? No, actually not. The attack on homosexuality, it started with Plato. It's complicated as to why he did it. I'm beginning to understand why he did. But it's wrong. It's just a mistake that you made. I'm correcting a mistake. But you talk about modeling yourself on noble people, modeling yourself on Achilles, on King David, who was not gay, but was married to another man, married to Jonathan. I talk about that. Model yourself on Richard the Lionheart, except on the stuff that, or Michael III, the Byzantine emperor. who they call him the drunkard, but that's because politics. Because he was a great warrior. You know, there are plenty of gay people that you can look at. I remember looking at a guy attacking homosexuals. And he showed a video from the 50s. And there is this beach full of gay men. And these men look like fighter pilots and astronauts. And this is the 60s when astronaut was to be a big deal. And there's this one guy fagging it up, just dancing around and all this kind of stuff. Hell, what is that term called? I'll probably think about it. And so the video showing this is what a homosexual is like. They're just looking at the one man camping. He's being campy. He's camping it up. Girl, he's doing that. Did you not notice the beach full of fighter pilots and astronauts? And then I noticed that the guy, it says, okay, enough of the camping, and he was winding it down. That's when the camera cut off. It's like, oh, now you want to cut off the camera? You see how they just lie? But, you know, just because you're gay, and I tell people, just because you're gay doesn't give you excuse to not be a man. You still got to defend yourself. You still got a family to defend. You still have a society you need to take a bullet for, if necessary. And if you can make a dress, if you can cut hair, then you can handle a gun. Because it's the same thing as just training your body. So you can do it, but you got to do it. Society depends on you. And Plato just didn't understand that we had a place for that. It's kind of interesting that all of the laws is like, Crete's about to build a city, here, what are good laws? And he just can't come to grips with the fact that we homosexuals have a place in a lawful society. Because he has just ideas and he just can't get over them, and that's fine. We all have our blind sides. Even though his brother, Glaucon, is a homosexual and a soldier, an aristocrat in good standing, even though the Spartan army is full of homosexuals and he's attacking homosexuality, and the Spartans and the Cretans, the greatest warriors in all of Greece, they don't understand what he's talking about. You know, and that's going to be what my next video is going to be about. I'm calling it 100 Years of Gay History. I guess I'll talk about it here. I'm going to read This Small Cloud, a personal memoir by Harry Daly, who was in the Metropolitan London Police from 1925 to 1950. In 1945, started the career of Scotty Bowers, full service. My Adventures in Hollywood and the Secret Sex Lives of the Stars. Believe it or not, this is a very moral man. I have a lot of respect for him. I'm going to talk about that. And also, I got this little book here called Loving, a photographic history of men in love, 1850s to 1950s. And then the 100 years, 1925 for Daly. And then 1975, my video on Nobody's Getting Away with Anything Here and the Nobody's Getting Away with Anything Here Redux, talking about my life. Now, I'll give you a warning beforehand, if you watch it, a lot of strange things have happened. I see a lot of strange things there. About 1975, when things fell apart, that's when Scotty Bowers retired from his life. And then, of course, I'm graduating from my senior year of high school is when we first hearing about this AIDS stuff, so I'm coming in as a gay man into this kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is that it was a damn lie. It's horrible. It's a mistake. So stop it. In the end, I say this not because I'm a gay man and I want things to go my way. The demons who rule this planet now, or at least rule the West, they've just been using us to destroy society. But the one good thing we could get out of it is to just stop the fag bashing and to bring gay people like me into society the way we should be. Okay, music and poetry, be on guard. Music and poetry, be on guard. Those are my notes. Republic 424, B through C. Okay, well, I'll just continue on with what I just read. To put it briefly, those in charge must cling to education and see that it isn't corrupted without their noticing it, which it was, guarding it against everything. Above all, they must guard as carefully as they can against any innovation in music and poetry or in the physical training that is counter to the established order. Physical training, by the way, includes dancing. And there was a reaction to the kind of dancing that we had in the 20th century if you heard about, I'll talk about it. This country dancing, not line dancing, square dancing was a reaction to that, and a healthy one. But of course, they just get mocked and ridiculed. Mocking people is one thing that a gentleman does not do, ever. It's very corrosive. And it destroys people even who are noble and moral. People care most for the song that is newest from the singer's lips. Someone might praise such a saying, thinking that the poet meant not new songs, but new ways of singing. Such a thing shouldn't be praised, and the poet shouldn't be taken to have meant it, for the guardians must be aware of changing to a new form of music, since it threatens the whole system. So true. As Damon says, and I am convinced, the musical modes are never changed without change to the most important of the city's laws. You can count me among those convinced as well. Okay? Adeimantus said, "Then it seems," I said, "that it is in music and poetry that our guardians must build their bulwark." At any rate, says Adeimantus, lawlessness creeps in there unnoticed. Yes. Yes, as if music and poetry were only play and did no harm at all. Oh, it's just having fun. No. And the people who push this poison on us know exactly what they're doing. And they'll mock you if you say something about it. Don't back down. No more. Except, of course, that when lawlessness has established itself there, it flows little by little into characters and ways of life. It certainly does. It's kind of interesting looking at how we're bringing in different people in the music industry in the 50s, how well behaved they are. It's like all of a sudden they started getting nasty. Now they're just nasty. In other words, instead of bringing them up, they brought us down. Then, greatly increased, okay, lawlessness, it steps into private contracts, and from private contracts, Socrates, it makes its insolent ways into the laws and government, until in the end it overthrows everything, public and private. Well, is that the way it goes? I think so. All right. Then, as we had said at first, our children's games must from the very beginning be more law-abiding, for if their games become lawless and their children follow suit, isn't it impossible for them to grow into good law-abiding men? It is. Well, I read beyond what I meant to, but needed to be done. All righty, 424. The Republic, 401E through 402A. Aren't these the reasons, Glaucon, that education in music and poetry is most important? First, because rhythm and harmony permeate the inner part of the soul more than anything else, affecting it most strongly and bringing it grace. So that someone is properly educated in music, it makes him graceful. But if not, just the opposite. Oh, the mutants. Oh, the mutants, the mutants, the music. It's true. It's all true. Everything he says is true. I don't know how many songs I was enchanted by. I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore. I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never ever ever make you forget you're a man. That kind of stuff there. What did it lead to? Single mother households. A catastrophe without question, and I would say without peer. Everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. But we're enchanted. And never ever ever make you forget you're a man, 'cause I'm a woman with Angelique. I don't remember what that was. It was some product, but I remember the commercials. Gay people, we also can't listen to bad music, although Rocky Horror Picture Show is not bad music, it's good music. Why? Because the system, in a way, because sometimes the system needs to be mocked. And I stand by Frankenfurter on this. I don't think it just needs to be mocked. Anyway. All right. If someone is properly educated in music and poetry, it makes them graceful, but it's not, then the opposite. Second, because anyone who has been properly educated in music and poetry will sense it acutely when something has been omitted from a thing, and when it hasn't been finely crafted or finely made by nature. And since he has the right distaste, he'll praise fine things, be pleased by them, and receive them into his soul. And being nurtured by them becomes fine and good. He'll rightly object to what is shameful, hating it, while he's still young and unable to grasp the reason. But because that's what music does, and they know that. But having been educated in this way, he will welcome the reason when it comes and recognize it easily because of its kinship with him. Okay? A lot of very bad ideas come through music. And then when you say something about it, they mock you, which a gentleman does not do. I will never mock you. I might mock you when you're just pissing me off and you'll shut the hell up. Okay. The Republic 429A. If boys are not properly raised to men, then no amount of legislation matters. If they are, then it's largely unnecessary. Okay, 425A. That's all I have on there, 425A. Then, as we said at first, our children's games must from the very beginning be more law-abiding. For if their games become lawless and the children follow suit, isn't it impossible for them to grow up into good and law-abiding men? It certainly is. But when children play the right games from the beginning and absorb lawfulness from music and poetry, it follows them in everything and fosters their growth, correcting anything in the city that may have been gone wrong before. In other words, the very opposite of what happens where the games are lawless. That's true. These people will discover the seemingly insignificant conventions their predecessors have destroyed. Which ones? Things like this. What he's saying is, on their own, they'll discover things that their ancestors did just automatically. Things like when it is proper for the young to be silent in front of their elders, when they should make their way for them and stand up in their presence, the care of parents, hairstyles. This stuff is not minor. The clothes and shoes to wear, the deportment, and everything else of that sort. Don't you agree? I do. I think it foolish to legislate just things. Verbal or written decrees will never make them come about or last. How could they? At any rate, Adamantus, it looks as though the start of someone's education determines what follows. Does it always encourage like? It does. Okay. The Republic. What is education really about? The Republic 518C through 519A. Now it looks as though the other so-called virtues of the soul are akin to those of the body, for they really aren't there beforehand, but are added later by habit and practice. That's why you should pray a rosary. However, the virtue of reason seems to belong above all to something more divine, which never loses its power, but is either useful and beneficial or useless and harmful, depending on the way it is turned. Have you ever noticed this about people? Okay, so he's talking about intelligence. And I talked about how there are animals with high IQs running around in this country. This is what he's talking about. Have you ever noticed this about people who are said to be vicious but clever? How keen the vision of their little soul is and how sharply it distinguishes the things it is turned toward? This shows that its sight isn't inferior, but rather is forced to serve evil ends, so that the sharper it sees, the more evil it accomplishes. Absolutely. However, if a nature of this sort has been hammered at from childhood and freed from the bonds of kinship with becoming, if the nature of this sort has been hammered at from childhood and freed from the bonds of kinship with becoming, which have been fastened to it by fasting, greed, and other such pleasures in which, like leaden weights, pull vision downwards, if being rid of these, it turned to look at true things, which I say the same soul, then I say that the same soul of the same person would see these most sharply, just as it now does the things it presently turns towards. Probably so. Metanoia, repentance, metanoia, a turning away from darkness to the light. You look at the light, you become light. You look at the darkness, you become darkness. Which dog will you become? The vicious dog or the good dog? The loyal dog? Well, it depends on which dog you feed. And this is why it is so important that you pray for everybody. As much as I hate Nancy Pelosi and these bankers who destroyed the country, if they died right now, they're going to go to hell. And I don't want them to go to hell. I have no problem with being wrong. I have no problem with you being from a different race or different religion. But really the bottom line is if you hate Jesus, then I have nothing to say to you. The Republic 538D through 539C. Oh, when your kids come home from college and they're saying these crazy things, you're wondering what the hell happened to you in college. 538D. Yeah, now there, and by the way, when just going back to that last quote, it's like you got to pull your snout out of the trough. As I say, you're down there in the trough, pull your snout out of the trough. Look up, don't be an animal. Okay. There are other ways of living, however, opposite to these and full of pleasures that flatter the soul and attract it to themselves, but which don't persuade sensible people who continue to honor and obey the convictions of their fathers. That's right. And then a questioner comes along and asks someone of this sort, what is the fine? And when he answers that what he has heard from the traditional lawgiver, the argument refutes him. And by refuting him often, and in many places, shakes him from his convictions. Refuting him often, and in many places, knowing that he is ignorant of why things are the way they are, so he can't defend them. So he feels like there is no defense, but there is. Except for the homosexuality. It makes him believe that the fine is no more fine than shameful. And the same with the just, the good, and the things he honored most. What do you think his attitude will be then to honoring and obeying his earlier convictions? Of necessity, says Glaucon, he will honor or obey them in the same way. Then, when he no longer honors and obeys these convictions and can't discover the true ones, will he be likely to adopt any other way of life than that which flatters him? No, it won't. And so, I suppose, from being law-giving, he becomes lawless. Inevitably. Then, as I asked before, is it only to be expected that this is what happens to those who take up arguments in this way? And don't they, therefore, they deserve a lot of sympathy? You have to pray for people who are going to hell. You don't want to, I did a video on, I woke up in hell one day. You'll know instantly where you are. You don't want, I used to tell people go to hell all the time. You don't want anybody to go there. Yes, and they deserve our pity too. Then if you don't want your 30-year-olds to be objects of such pity, you'll have to be extremely careful about how you introduce them to arguments. That's right. Why 30? Because you go to college in your 20s. And then by the time the bullshit that's shoveled in your head takes it and you turn it into, you're about 30 years old, turns you into a pathetic creature, you're about 30 years old. Now we're going to talk about healthcare. And I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from Timaeus, and you're going to be like, this doesn't have anything to do with healthcare. There's a lot to do with healthcare. Alrighty. Timaeus 90a. See, we've moved from the green, and now we're going to move to the orange. Shift the subject. (90A through D). I'm going to go through here. All right, this is what we should understand about the human. If I were the emperor of America, I would take the creators of shows like Game of Thrones and The Boys, and I would execute all of them. I would just execute them. You're like, what? Because they reduce human beings to meat. We're just talking meat. And that's what Klaus Schwab and all these people pushing these weird, freaky agendas just think we're just meat. Here's something to think about. Now, we ought to think of the most sovereign part of our soul as God's gift to us, given to be our guiding spirit. This, of course, is the type of soul that, as we maintain, resides in the top part of our bodies. Okay? It raises up away from the earth. Take your snout out of the trough. Look up. And toward what is akin to us in heaven, as though we are plants grown not from the earth, but from heaven. In saying this, we speak absolutely correctly. For it is from heaven, the place from which our souls were originally born. The divine part suspends our head. Okay, for it is from heaven, the place from which our souls were originally born. The divine part suspends our head, that is our root, and so keeps our whole body erect. What a great image. This is like at the very end of Timaeus. This is the true image of man, because we're held erect because we're pulled up to heaven. This is our real roots, not this. So if a man has become absorbed in his appetites or ambitions and takes great pains to further them, all his thoughts are bound to become merely mortal. Insofar as it is at all possible for a man to become thoroughly mortal, he cannot help but fully succeed in this, seeing that he has cultivated his mortality all along. On the other hand, and I talk about praying a rosary. I did a series, a boot camp for saints on the Gospel of Mark, because it's modeled on the zodiac, and they want you to rotate through that. And each time you rotate through, you become just a little better as a human being. On the other hand, you could just become an animal. And that's your responsibility. When you're caught in that depth, that's one thing. But when you've turned around, you've repented, your metanoia, and you've turned to the light, you slowly start getting better. On the other hand, if a man has seriously devoted himself to the love of learning and to true wisdom, Jesus, if he has exercised these aspects of himself above all, then there is absolutely no way that his thoughts can fail to be immortal and divine, should truth come within his grasp, in this case, Jesus. And to the extent that human nature can partake of immortality, he can in no way fail to achieve this, constantly caring for his divine part as he does. Keeping well ordered the guiding spirit that lives within him, he must indeed be supremely happy. It is. When I see people engage in crime and this kind of, and being powerful and getting away with it, friends, it's bad for them. You should fear for their souls. It's bad for them. The way I like to put it, these people, God is herding them up a mountain so he can shove them off a cliff. And that's what's going to happen. But the instant they turn, you got to be there to help them. Save them. Now, there is but one way to care for anything, and that is to provide for it the nourishment and motions that are proper to it. And the motions that have an affinity to the divine part within us are the thoughts and revolutions of the universe. These surely are the ones which each of us should follow. I'm not going to get into it, it's a little bit complicated, very psychological here. We should redirect the revolutions of our head that were thrown off course at our birth by coming to learn the harmonies and revolutions of the universe, and so bring into conformity with its objects our facility of understanding, as it was in its original condition. And when this conformity is complete, we have achieved our goal, that most excellent life offered to humankind by the gods, both now and forevermore. We're talking about healthcare or anything, this is where we start. Timaeus 28a and footnote A, a fun little fact we're about to find out. As I see it, then, we must begin by making the following distinction between that which always is and has no beginning, becoming, and that which becomes but never is. Remember, we're talking about when you direct yourself to the becoming, the stuff that's coming into the world instead of the eternal, that's when you have some trouble. The former, that which always is grasped by understanding, which involves a reasoned account. It is unchanging. The latter is grasped by opinion, which involves unreasoning sense perception. It comes to be and passes away, but never really is. Now, everything that comes to be must of necessity come to be by the agency of some cause, for it is impossible for anything to come to be without a cause. So whenever the craftsman looks at what is always changeless and using a thing of that kind as his model, reproduces its form and character, then of necessity, all that he so completes is beautiful. But were he to look at a thing that has come to be and use as model something that has been begotten, his work will lack beauty. Now here's a footnote. Now everything that comes to be must necessity be by the agency of some cause. The footnote. Becoming and coming to be, here as elsewhere, translate the same Greek word, genesis, and its cognates. The Greek word does not say, as in English, comes to be does, that once a thing has come to be, it now is or has being. It's just, it's always moving. It's not ever settled. It's coming to be, coming to be, coming to be, coming to be. And it's going, and it's coming from something, and it's going to something, but it's always moving and moving, moving and moving and moving. And this is the cosmos. Okay? Does it have something to do with healthcare? Yes, ma'am, it does. We're going to get into that. What is this? Okay. Timaeus 49c. Here's an example of it. Now, here we're going to have Platonic science, which everybody, Plato was an excellent scientist. Just remember, we have, as the way I put in a previous video, Plato gets us to here, but now we have telescopes and microscopes and all sorts of new things to get us down to here, get us closer and closer. And we just launched the James Webb Space Telescope, so it gets us down there even further. But, I mean, here's his story on his Platonic solids on the back. The cosmos is made of triangles. Are you crazy? Not as crazy as you think. Not as crazy as you think. All these 3D images you see on your computer games, those are triangles. Made up a bunch of little tiny triangles. How many triangles can you push through in a second, in a millisecond? That's the judgment of speed. I'm learning chemistry. A lot of triangles show up in physical reality, the physical reality of the molecules. Triangles are very common. Anyway, and he talks a lot about air, or fire, air, water, and earth. There's something called qualia, things that we sense and that we feel. We feel heat, we feel cold, we see blue. But this is stuff of the mind. That stuff doesn't really exist. There's temperature and there's frequency, and that's what those really are. But so he talks a lot about qualia. Paragraph 49c. The new starting point of my account of the universe needs to be more complex than the earlier one. Then we distinguished two kinds, but now we must specify a third, one of a different sort. The earlier two sufficed for our previous account. One was proposed as a model, intelligible and always changeless. The second as an imitation of the model, something that possesses becoming and is visible. Okay? So there's the eternal and the cosmos made out of it. And again, this is the Timaeus. Whereas with the Republic, how do we catapult up to the eternal? How did the eternal descend into the world? We did not distinguish a third kind at that time because we thought that we could make do with the two of them. Now, however, it appears that our account compels us to attempt to eliminate in words a kind that is difficult and vague. What must we suppose it to do and to be? This above all, it is a receptacle of all becoming, its wet nurse, as it were, like the Blessed Virgin Mary. However true that statement may be, we must nevertheless describe it more clearly. This is a difficult task, particularly because it requires us to raise a preliminary problem about fire and the other three: fire, air, water, and earth. It is difficult to say, and so I have to read carefully because it's weird. It is difficult to say of each of them in a way that employs a reliable and stable account. Which one of the sort is the sort of thing one should really call water rather than fire? Or which one should call some one of these rather than any and every one of these? What problem then do they present for us to work through in likely fashion? And how and in what manner are we to speak about this third kind, this receptacle? First, we see, or think we see, the thing that we had just now been calling water, condensing and turning to stones and earth. Next, we see the same thing of dissolving and dispersing, turning to wind and air. And air, when ignited, turning to fire. And then we see fire being condensed and extinguished and turning back to the form of air. And air coalescing and thickening and turning back into cloud and mist. When these are compressed still more, we see them turning into flowing water, which we see turning to earth and stones once again. In this way, then, they transmit their coming to be to one another in a cycle, or so it seems. Now then, since none of these appear ever to remain the same, which one of them can one categorically assert without embarrassment to be some particular thing, this one, and not something else? One cannot. Rather, the safest course by far is to propose that we speak about these things in the following way, that we invariably observe becoming different. What we invariably observe becoming different at different times, fire, for example, to characterize that, i.e. fire, not as this, but each time as what is such. And speak of water not as this, but always that as what is such. And never to speak of anything else as this, as though it has some stability. Of all the things which we point and use, of all the things at which we point and use the expressions that and this, and so think we are designating something. For it gets away without abiding the charge of that or this, or any other expression that indicts them of being stable. It is in fact safest not to refer it to any of these expressions. Rather, instead of that and this, what is such, coming around what it was again and again, that's the thing to call it in each and every case. So fire, and generally everything that has becoming, it is safest to call what is altogether such. Okay, so I'm going to stop reading there because it's getting complicated. Even my head's swimming and I know what I'm aiming for. Bottom line is this: everything is becoming, it's becoming, it's becoming. Everything's moving. Fire is becoming air, air is becoming water, water is becoming earth, and you know what I mean. Everything's changing. Okay, his science can be updated, and it was updated. It's fine. It's still more right than you think. There's a constant churning, a constant becoming. Okay, that's the cosmos. Timaeus 88c through 89a. Getting close to the end. For both of these conditions, there is in fact one way to preserve oneself, and that is not to exercise the soul without exercising the body, nor the body without the soul, so that each may be balanced by the other and so be sound. The mathematician, then, or the ardent devotee of any other intellectual discipline, should also provide exercise for his body by taking part in gymnastics, while one who takes care to develop his body should in turn practice the exercises of the soul by applying himself to the arts and to every pursuit of wisdom, if he is to truly deserve the joint epithets of fine and good. And various bodily parts should also be looked after in this same way, in imitation of the structure of the universe. The universe is always changing. It's becoming, it's becoming, it's becoming. So are you. And if you don't do this, you're going to start getting sick. For since the body is heated and cooled inside by things that enter it, and is dried and moistened by things outside of it, and made to undergo the consequent changes by both of these emotions, it will happen that when a man subjects his body to these emotions, when it has been made in a state of rest, the body is overcome. It will happen that when a man subjects his body to these emotions, when it has been in a state of rest, when you're not moving, the body is overcome and brought to ruin. But if he models himself after what we had called the foster mother and nurse of the universe, the Blessed Virgin, and persistently refuses to allow his body any degree of rest, but exercises and continually agitates it through the whole extent, he will keep in a state of natural equilibrium the internal and external motions. And if the agitation is a measured one, he will succeed in bringing order and regularity to these disturbances and those elemental parts that wander all over the body according to their affinities, in the way described in the account we gave earlier about the cosmos. Okay? If the agitation is a measured one, I always say whether you're learning new things or learning new exercises, push, 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 but don't shove. Don't break it, but keep pushing. Like, for example, physical training or learning the piano, which is what I've been doing for the last couple of years. an hour a week, you'll improve, believe it or not. Slowly, but you'll do it. So make it 2 hours a week. And then don't worry about it. Maybe you're busy. He will not allow one hostile element to position itself next to another and so breed wars and diseases in the body. Indeed, he will have one friendly element placed by another and so bring about health. I'm going to stop reading there. Well, let's keep going. Now, the best of the motions is one that occurs within himself and is caused by oneself. This is the motion that bears the most kinship to understanding and to the motion of the universe. Motion that is caused by the agency of something else is less good. Worst of all is the motion that moves, part by part, a passive body in a state of rest, and does so by means of other things. This then is why the motion induced by physical exercise is the best of those that purify and restore the body. Second is that induced by rocking motions of sea travel or travel in any other kind of conveyance that doesn't tire one out. The third type of motion is useful in an occasional instance of dire need. Barring that, however, no man in his right mind should tolerate it. I remember when I lived in Florida, there were lots of old, really obese people driving around in these scooters. I always said, if you're going to do that, you might as well dig your own grave. This is one of the major reasons why healthcare is 10, probably 20 times more expensive than it should be. About half the population does nothing to take care of that. And it doesn't take much. Not asking for washboard abs and bubble butts. I mean, I'm a binge eater. I try to stop it, but I just can't. I had a binge this morning and last night. All right. Here's the other reason why healthcare is so expensive. Timaeus 89b through D. Yeah. Okay, what's my notes here? Diseases like people have a life history. Take care of yourself and you can take care of it. Don't meddle, or at least meddle as little as possible. So when you're going through a disease, just let it go. This is exactly what he would have said about the healthcare crisis from 2020. What he would have said about that. Timaeus 89b through D. And okay, continue with what I've been reading. The third type of motion is useful in an occasional instance of dire need. Barring that, however, no man in his right mind should tolerate it. This is medical purging by means of drugs. We should avoid aggravating with drugs diseases that aren't particularly dangerous. Every disease has a certain makeup that in a way resembles the natural makeup of living things. In fact, the constitution of such beings goes through an ordered series of stages throughout their life. This is true of a species as a whole, and also of its individual members, each of which is born with its allotted span of life, barring unavoidable accidents. This is because its triangles, because everything's made up of triangles, are so made up right from the beginning as to have the capacity to hold up for a limited time beyond which life cannot be prolonged any further. Now, diseases have a similar makeup, so that when you try to wipe them out with drugs before they have run their due course, the mild diseases are liable to get severe. We're finding that out with the healthcare crisis because it's coming back around for people who took the treatment. That is why you need to cater to all such diseases by taking care of yourself to the extent that you are free and have the time to do that. What you should not do is aggravate a stubborn irritation with drugs. And that's another thing. The pharmaceutical industry is just run by a bunch of con artists. I'm beginning to see now they have state power to compel you. That's a new one. This is all going away. It's about to collapse. It's all going away. It's about to collapse. Republic. Going back to the Republic. 407B through D. Put that over there. We won't quarrel with Cyclades about this, but let's try to find out whether the rich person must indeed practice virtue. and whether his life is not worth living if he doesn't, or whether tending an illness, while it is an obstacle to applying oneself to carpentry and other crafts, is no obstacle whenever taking this advice. Okay, I shouldn't have read that. Here's where I should have started. But excessive care of the body, over and above physical training, is pretty well the biggest obstacle of all. It's troublesome in managing a household, in military service, and even in a sedentary public office. Yet the most important of all, surely, is that it takes any kind of learning, thought, or private meditation difficult, for it's always imagining some headaches or dizziness and accusing philosophy of causing them. Hence, whenever this kind of virtue is practiced and examined, excessive care of the body hinders it. It makes a person think he's ill and all the time concerned with his body. Probably does. So many, they just keep coming up with, oh, well, we have a new problem, a new psychological problem that you must, oh, well, I've been diagnosed, and blah, blah, blah. Laws, 790E through 791C. And here's again with the part about moving. And of course, a lot of the particular stuff that he talks about here, you may think is kind of crazy, and that's fine. But it's still, you gotta move. And a lot of mental health problems, if I were a psychologist and you came to me with depression, and I'm like, well, do you do cardio? No? Okay, do you do any kind of weight training? Okay, here's a paper I'd have ready. Go do this for 6 weeks and then come back if you need help. The fact that young children, here's some further evidence from which the same conclusion should be drawn. The fact that young children's nurses and the women who cure corybantic conditions have learned this treatment from experience and come to recognize its value. Corybantic conditions, frenzied pathological states accompanied by a strong desire to dance, popularly supposed to be called by the Corybantes, spirits in attendance to the goddess Cybele. The condition was cured homeopathically by disciplined music and dancing of corybantic ritual. I suppose you know what a mother does when she wants to get a wakeful child to sleep. Far from keeping him still, she takes care to move him about, rocking him constantly in her arms, not silently, but humming a kind of tune. The cure consists of music. The cure for corybantic conditions consists of movement to the rhythms of dance and song. The mother makes her child pipe down just as surely as the music of the pipes bewitches and frenzies the Bacchic reveler. Well then, sir, said Plinius, have we any particular explanation for all this? The reason's not very hard to find, says the Athenian. Well, what is it? Both these conditions are a species of fear, and fear is a result of some inadequacy in personality. And also coming from just getting bogged down in a swamp, get up and move. Go take a walk. When one treats such conditions by vigorous movement, this external motion, by canceling out the internal agitation that gives rise to fear and frenzy, induces a feeling of calm and peace of the soul, in spite of the painful thumping of the heart experienced by each patient. The result is very gratifying. Whereas the wakeful children are sent to sleep, the revelers, far from sleep, by being set to dance to the music of the pipes, are restored to mental health after their derangement with the assistance of the gods, to whom they sacrifice so propitiously. This explanation, brief as it is convincing enough. To which Plinius responds, yes, indeed. And what do they want to do during the healthcare crisis? Lock you down. Cover yourself up so that you can't get a good circulation going. And now, the catastrophe of animal control. We just finished with healthcare. The catastrophe of animal control. And we're the animals. The Republic, 492B through E. Nothing that we're doing today would surprise Plato. American Idol. The Greeks living in Italy had their version of American Idol. American Idol is a bad thing. Republic, 492B through E. Now I think that where is he? Okay. Now I think that the philosophical nature as we define will inevitably grow to possess every virtue if it happens to receive appropriate instruction. We talked about that. But if it is sown, planted, and grown in an inappropriate environment, it will develop in quite the opposite way, unless some God happens to come to its rescue. And Jesus will, in the end, come to its rescue. But if it is sown, planted, or grown in an inappropriate environment, it will develop in quite the opposite way. That's the plan. That's why we have all these zombies and mutants running around. They're doing it on purpose. Or do you agree with the general opinion that certain young people are actually corrupted by sophists? That there are certain sophists with significant influence on the young people who corrupt them through private teaching? Isn't it rather the very people who say this who are the greatest sophists of all? Since they educate most completely, turning young and old, men and women, into precisely the kind of people they want them to be? When do they do that? So, you have these politicians complaining about the sophists, when in fact they're doing the same thing. But many of them are sitting together in assemblies, courts, theaters, army camps, or in some other public gathering of the crowd. They object very loudly and excessively to some of the things that are said or done and approve others the same way, shouting and clapping, so that the very rocks and surroundings echo the din of their praise or blame and double it. In circumstances like that, what is the effect, as they say, on a young person's heart? When private training can hold out and not be swept away by that kind of praise or blame and be carried by the flood wherever it goes, so he'll say the same things. So he'll say the same things are beautiful or ugly as the crowd does, follow the same pursuits as they do, and be the same sort of person as they are. He'll be under great compulsion to do so, Socrates, says Adeimantus. And yet we haven't mentioned the greatest compulsion of all. What's that? It's what these educators and sophists impose by the actions if their words fail to persuade. Or don't you know that they punish anyone who isn't persuaded with disenfranchisement, fines, or death? They most certainly do. Okay, where am I reading to? All the way through E. What other sophists then, or what private conversations do you think will prevail in opposition to these? I don't suppose that they will be. No, indeed. It'd be very foolish to even try to oppose them, for there isn't now, hasn't been in the past, or ever will be in the future, anyone with a character so unusual that he has been educated by virtue in spite of the contrary education he received from the mob. I mean, a human character. The divine, as the saying goes, is an exception to the rule. You should realize that if anyone is saved and becomes what he ought to be under our private constitutions, he has been saved, you might rightly say, by a divine dispensation. This astroturfing, you have grassroots, natural, growing up from the roots, people coming to to want something. Grassroots is artificial, or astroturf is the artificial creation of that. Getting the so-called crowds to say crazy things, to get you to believe crazy things, making you think, like through careful control, that they do on Twitter, Facebook, the oppression that they put on there. This is part of their animal control. They're trying to direct you in a certain way because they know this works because they've read their Plato. The worst stress to be in is social stress, where everybody thinks that's one of the major reasons why, I thought I wasn't into football and stuff because I was a little gay boy. Turns out to be my real personality type. Most guys like us have trouble catching a football. But one of the things, like for playing baseball, is I just couldn't catch a baseball. I couldn't catch for crap. Well, I didn't have a father. There were no men in my life. Okay? How am I supposed to catch a baseball if I don't catch baseballs? How can I needed someone to play catch with. And I remember football, and we're going in, we have our little huddle, and they said, well, I want you to go into this hole, and you go into that hole. I was like, I had no idea what they were, and I just felt stupid. Well, and I was Willie when I was going. If I knew little Willie, I'd just like, well, you've never asked your coach because you don't know, and you expect yourself to know, but you just feel dumb. And so when everybody's yelling and screaming about whatever that's crazy, you're going to tend to want to fall in line. But Jesus is there to help you, so keep your eye on Jesus. Republic, 493, A through C. Not one of those paid private teachers, whom the people call sophists and consider to be their rivals in the craft, teaches anything other than the convictions that the majorities express when they are gathered together. Indeed, these are precisely what sophists call wisdom. It's as if someone were learning the moods and appetites of a huge, strong beast that he's rearing, how to approach and handle it when it's most difficult to deal with or most gentle, and what makes it so, what sounds it utters in either condition, and what sounds soothe or anger it. Having learned all this through tending the beast over a period of time, he calls this knack wisdom. Gathers his information together as if it were a craft, and starts to teach it. In truth, he knows nothing about which of these convictions is fine or shameful, good or bad, just or unjust, when he applies all these names in abundance with how the beast reacts, calling what it enjoys good and what it angers it bad. He has no other account to give of these terms, and he calls what he is compelled to do just and fine, for he hasn't seen and cannot show anyone else how such compulsion and goodness really differ. Don't you think, by God, that someone like that is a strange educator? I do indeed. And so a true educator, a true legislator, needs to know how to lead people. Then does this person seem any different from the one who believes that it is wisdom to understand the moods and pleasures of a majority gathered from all quarters, whether they concern painting, music, or for that matter, politics? If anyone approaches the majority to exhibit his poetry or some other piece of craftsmanship or service to the city, and gives them mastery over him to any degree beyond what is avoidable, he'll be under the Diomedian compulsion, as it's called, to do the sort of thing of which they approve. But have you heard anyone presenting an argument that such things are truly good and beautiful that wasn't absolutely ridiculous? No, and I don't expect to ever hear from one. So really, they just think we're just wild animals. But in their heart of hearts, they know that we're human, and that we deserve justice, that we deserve to be brought up carefully, and you can be brought up carefully. Even people who are not especially smart, if you give them training in math, as Plato points out, they'll be better than they otherwise would have been. Okay. Now we're at the end. 752 laws, 752b through 753a. I did not mark it. There we go. I did mark it, sort of. Okay, now we're on the part where we can get out of this faster than you think. Got two final quotes. Laws 752b through 753a. Let's carry on out our program, certainly. Yes, we shall, says the Athenian, God willing, if we can keep old age at bay for long enough. God willing, says Clinias, can probably be taken for granted. Of course. So let's be guided by him and notice something else. What? They will find we've been pretty bold and foolhardy in launching this state of ours. What's made you say that? What have you in mind? I'm thinking of the cheerful way we're legislating for people to be new to legislating for people who'll be new to the laws we pass without bothering how they'll ever be brought to accept them. So when, after everything collapses, a lot of people, there's going to be a come to Jesus moment. They're going to realize everything's screwed up. But a lot of people, they're just not going to like the new stuff that's coming. As long as it doesn't bash homosexuals again, whatever. It's obvious to us all, Clinias, that even if we're not very clever, that at the start they won't easily accept any of it. Ideally, we remain on the spot long enough to see people getting a taste of the laws while they're still children, Then, when they've grown up and have become thoroughly accustomed to them, they can take part in the elections of all the offices of the state. If we manage that, assuming acceptable ways and means are available, then I reckon that the state would have a firm guarantee of survival when its school days are over. Okay, so they're launching a new state. This is what we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have a new state after this, I believe, with the same constitution. So I don't need to read any further than that. The problem in a single generation will take care of itself. Listen, this is going to fall apart. This stuff can't hold. It's collapsing before our eyes. But have faith, love God. Read Plato. And love one another, pray for one another, and we'll make it through. It's going to hurt. Yikes, but make it through. Finally, Laws 761A through D. This is of how we'll be able to cover a lot of ground. We'll be able to do a lot of one single act will be multi-purpose, multilateral. All sorts of different things will happen. While stationed in the various districts, their duties, these are the military people, will be citizens, will be as follows. To start with, they must see that the territory is protected against enemies as thoroughly as possible. They must dig trenches wherever necessary, and excavate trenches and erect fortifications to check any attempt to harm the land and the livestock. They will requisition the beasts of burdens and slaves, the local residents, for these purposes, and employ them at their discretion, picking as far as possible times when they are not required for their normal duties. The wardens must arrange that the enemy will be impeded at every turn, whereas movement of our own side by men or beasts of burden or cattle will be facilitated. And they must see that every road is as easy for the traveler as can be managed. The rain God sends must do to the countryside good, not harm. So the wardens will see that, while you're out there setting up fortifications, will see that the water flowing off the high ground down into any sufficiently deep ravines between the hills is collected by dikes and ditches, so that the ravines can retain and absorb it, and supply streams and springs for all the districts in the countryside below, and give even the driest of spots a copious supply of pure water. As for water that springs from the ground, the wardens must beautify the fountains and rivers that form by adorning them with trees and buildings. They must use drains to tap the individual streams and collect an abundant supply. And any grove or sacred enclosure which has been dedicated nearby must be embellished by having a perennial flow of water directed by irrigation into the very temples of the gods. The young men should erect in every quarter gymnasia for themselves and senior citizens, construct warm baths for the old folk, and lay up a large stock of thoroughly dry food. All this will help to relieve the invalids and farmers wearied by the labor of the fields, and it will be a much kinder treatment than the tender mercies of some fool of a doctor. Boom, Plato. This is Plato's Complete Works, edited by John Cooper, associate editor D.S. Hutchinson. I mean, you can get the free stuff online, but just get this. The introductions are fantastic. I hope this has helped. So let's go out there and let's do a lot of praying, and let's show a lot of true love and compassion and warmth to other people who are out there struggling just as we are. And know in your heart that that this stuff is not going to last. It's all going away, and we got plenty of options. We're going to be all right. God bless.